who were moved by how we responded to the central symbol of our people and our tradition, falling in the midst of services. And we thought that it was most appropriate, in addition to the fasting that many of you did, to spend a portion of a night studying Torah, and we use the word Torah in the realm of Jewish study. We don't just mean the 5 books of Moses, but all the wisdom that emerges from that. Studying Torah as a way of celebrating Torah in response to the trauma that happened to Torah in our midst. One of the great students of and teachers of Torah in our wider community is Rabbi Yosef Kanievsky, with whom I love sharing ideas, learning from, and watching others engage with I'll speak directly to you, your love of and your nimble and lovely way you bring others into a relationship with the texts that are so dear to you and so dear to me. I'm so grateful that you're here, Rabbi Kanievsky, and I want to introduce Rabbi Kanievsky, who's going to share some words and some texts of Torah with us. Rabbi Kanievsky.
It's always a delight to be here, and I am especially admiring Rabbi Kligfeld in general and in particular for the way that he responded to and galvanized all of you to respond to this, as you said, unique and non-scripted event in the life. And I guess it was the day that he sent out the email to everyone that a number of people, David Diamond and other people, sent it to me, and I was completely taken not only by the thoroughness with which you researched and thought about the topic, but also with the creativity that you invested in it, and that's the testament to that is here tonight. And I welcome the opportunity to participate in a small way. I feel bad. I feel like I shouldn't have eaten today. I started feeling bad about 10 minutes ago. I've been feeling bad all day. And I wanted to share a couple of words that really come from a remarkable teaching of Rabbi Soloveitchik concerning the physical Sefer Torah. And an essay he dedicated to the sanctity of the Sefer Torah and what it is that makes the Sefer Torah the unique object in Jewish lore that it is. He talked about the fact that there are times that human beings are likened to a Sefer Torah. For example, if a person is present, b'shat yitziat hashama, literally at the moment that another human being dies, there is an obligation to tear kriya, to tear one's garment. And the Gemara explicitly, the Gemara explains that by explicitly comparing the departure of the soul from the body to witnessing a Sefer Torah being burned. And that's why we respond with kriya. And in that sense, the human being is compared to a Sefer Torah. But, Rabbi Soloveitchik continues, there are many more instances in which it goes in the reverse. A Sefer Torah is compared to a human being, or to put it even more bluntly, a Sefer Torah is thought of as if it were a human being. For example, the most direct example, do you know where we learn that, or from where we learn, that we rise when a Sefer Torah is in movement in the room? You know where it's derived from? It's derived from Mipnei Sevataku, which is the mitzvah to stand before the wise, right? And the Gemara says, you stand before the wise person, how much more so you stand before the Sefer Torah. The Sefer Torah is thought of as if it were a scholar. And the movement of the Sefer Torah in the room, or within our Dalet Amot, is likened to a scholar passing in front of our Dalet Amot, and therefore we rise. Similarly, and this is not just in foggy lore, but there are actually halakhic references to situations in which the community is one short of a minyan. There are actually references to a beit din that requires a minyan in order to intercalate the year, to add the extra month of Adar. If they only have 9, they need a 10th, there are rabbinic references to counting a Sefer Torah as the 10th, counting the Sefer Torah as the 10th to a minyan. Again, the Sefer Torah is, in these kinds of sources as well, regarded as if it is a human being. And perhaps most poignantly, when the Sefer Torah can't be used anymore, what do we do with it? We bury it. And there is a preference to bury it. I don't know if this is carried out in practice or not, but there is a rabbinic source in which a preference is expressed to bury the Sefer Torah next to a scholar. And it is regarded as a great honor for human beings to be buried next to a scholar, and similarly for a Sefer Torah. And so Rabbi Soloveitchik develops this idea that we look at the Sefer Torah, and in a certain respect, we see a living person. And he goes on to explore this idea a little bit farther. Why would we think of a Sefer Torah as if it's a living person, as if it's an embodiment of life itself? And he goes on and develops the next part of the teaching by pointing out that virtually anything in Jewish life that is endowed with holiness, that is endowed with Kedusha, that Kedusha is the result of human effort. Even Yerushalayim had to be, there's a whole series of rituals that had to be carried out in order to sanctify Jerusalem, in order to sanctify the Beit HaMikdash. Virtually anything that is holy requires a human action to sanctify it. And then Rabbi Soloveitchik turns to the Sefer Torah. There's a lot of people think that a Sefer Torah is holy, it has sanctity, because of the text that it contains, or because of the names of God that are written therein. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says this is not it at all. This is not why a Sefer Torah is holy. It's not what endows it with Kedusha. What endows the Sefer Torah with Kedusha is the work and the thought, the kavanah, of the sofer. That the person who invests in the writing of each and every letter, invests, and here Rabbi Soloveitchik grows somewhat poetic, but and spiritually passionate. It's not just that the person who is writing the Sefer Torah has in mind, I'm writing it l'shem Sefer Torah, I'm writing it for the sake of writing a Sefer Torah, it's lishma in that way. It's not just that. It's that the sofer, the person writing the Torah, ideally brings to the labor all of the hopes and aspirations that the Jewish people have historically had, all of the fears and anxieties, all of the memories, all of the stories, all of the visions, all of the aspirations for the redemption in the future. All of that is what is brought by the sofer into the act of writing, which is to say that the sum total of the Jewish person, the memories, the anxieties, the fears, the hopes, the dreams, all of it, the sum total of what makes a Jewish person is invested literally into the writing. And that is what makes the Sefer Torah a holy object. And that's why we think of the Sefer Torah as a person. Why we stand as if we were standing before a human scholar, or we bury it as if it were a person. Why it counts toward a minyan under certain circumstances, as if it were a person. Sefer Torah is literally invested with the collective persona of the Jewish person. And we need not be scribes ourselves to appreciate this. The Sefer Torah that are here at Temple Beth Am, the Sefer Torah that are in any and every shul throughout the world, contains all of these same emotions, all of the same pathos of Jewish life. Think about any given Sefer Torah. How many babies were named in front of that Sefer Torah with a parent holding the Atzei Chaim? How many B'nai Mitzvah were called to the Torah for the first time in front of that Sefer Torah? How many Ofrus were celebrated with that Sefer Torah? How many Yortzites were observed over that Sefer Torah? How many holidays how many fast days. The Sefer Torah is the embodiment of every Jewish individual, is the embodiment of the Jewish people. All of our memories, all of our feelings, all of our emotions, all of our experiences, they're all there in the Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah is a Jewish human being. That's the way we think of it, that's the way we experience it, that's the way we treat it. And I think the great difference between the two Torah holidays of the year, what I mean by that are Shavuot and Simchat Torah. Now Shavuot is about the Torah in the abstract. Right? It's about the great breadth of Torah learning that has been done over the many centuries. Simchat Torah is different. Simchat Torah is about the Sefer Torah itself. When we have an intuitive reaction and response to simply not only holding the Sefer Torah, but to dancing with it. The way we dance with one another, the way that brides and grooms dance with one another, the way that parents and children dance with one another, the way that community members dance with one another. That's the feeling of Simchat Torah. And we all know, if we have ever, and I know that we all have, danced with the Sefer Torah and Simchat Torah, we all know exactly what Rabbi Soloveitchik is talking about. That it is an exalted, living, almost human member of our community that is transcendent of any one generation, transcendent of any one community or synagogue. It's all of us. It's everybody. It's all of Klal Yisrael through time and space, all within those scrolls on those Atzei Chaim. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says this is why the holiest object we have is the Sefer Torah. It's all because of this. And you have, as a community, so honored this tradition of what the Sefer Torah is, what a Sefer Torah represents. I just want to and feel it to be a tremendous privilege to have participated, even in this small way, in what the holy work that you as a community have done. And really thank you for the inspiration. As I mentioned, Rabbi Kligfeld, at 6:30, actually need to be, we have our Temple Beth Shabbos run tonight. I tried to switch, I couldn't get out of it. All right, that's holy work also.
I want to run everyone through the rest of the schedule. I wanted Rabbi Knesset to teach right from the beginning because he was on a calendar. So very soon, dinner is going to be served. Is there anyone in the room who is fasting today? Norm was there. Okay, so our 3 fasters from today, have you broken your fast yet? So, okay. So we're going to get the food as you can. I want to encourage everyone to come get food. And then, what's that? Yes, the 3 fasters should go first. And pretty soon after you get food, we're going to start the rest of the program because we want to make sure that we have the time to do it all. Basically, we're going to have some learning with Joel Grossman and Rabbi Lucas and myself. And then we have the Torah here. The Torah that Phil is here. And when we're done, we're going to dance with them. We're going to maybe push the table aside and do a mini hakafa and celebrate the Torah that is fixed. 2 things I want you to notice throughout the evening. On every table is, and I want to thank Corey for compiling this, those of you who fasted and sent in reflections, there was some minor editing we did just in terms of space. Most of what you wrote appears in its entirety. If for some reason you submitted and it does not appear, I apologize. Corey was the recipient of all that. Hopefully everything is there. And it's wonderful to hear what people wrote in their response to fasting. I think there were a total of about 100 or 115 fasters in this program. Wow. Throughout the room, you will see short snippets of some, not all, of the ones that appear in the booklet have been put on these large sticky notes, almost like a page of Talmud where you have the core text in the center without the author, so that it's just the idea. What I want to encourage you throughout the night is to go up and read what people wrote and then write your own comments, what those writings about the fast evoked from you. So we'll basically be creating a living document on the writings that people have done in response to the Torah fasting. You can do that in your own time throughout the night. The food's coming out. Please come take, and then really in about 10 minutes, we want to start the rest of the program so we have time to do all of it. So Food is served, right? Served.
As soon as the salad comes,
different. So it's nice to be back home here in Los Angeles. And it's really a delight to come back to this kind of a completion, this kind of a culminating event, and to participate. I echo what Rabbi Kanevsky said about my admiration of the way that this community has rallied. This community has come to say we're part of a whole, and it took each one of us in some way or another to contribute something of ourselves in order to make that happen. And I'm very excited by that and proud of it, and I was delighted and honored to be a part of it. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. We did it on purpose. Isn't that right, Joe?
I'd like to teach a little bit tonight about different types of blessings, different types of brachot. And the particular blessing that I want to focus in on is the blessing that we say over Torah study. There are lots of different types of blessings that we have in our tradition. There are blessings that we say over food. So if you have an apple, you say Borei Kriya Eitz. Those of you who were at Rabbi Kligfeld's High Holiday service, you know that there are blessings for all types of different occasions and events and activities. And there are blessings that we say at a particular moment in our lives, right? The Shechianu blessing, or blessings that we'll say over certain holidays, like the act of, or commandments that we're asked to perform in a given time. Like in a couple nights, we'll start lighting the Chanukiah, and we'll say blessings over the commandment that God has given us to light the Hanukkah candles, and we'll say a Shechianu, thanking God for sustaining us and keeping us in life, and for performing miracles. All sorts of different blessings. But the blessing that we say over Torah study is unique in one particular way, and I wanted to share that way with you today. The blessing that you say over food, for example, each time you have a discrete action of eating, you need to say a new blessing. So when you have an apple, you say Borei Kriya Eitz. An hour later, if you want to have another apple, you say Borei Kriya Eitz all over again. One act of eating has nothing to do with the other. And so the rabbis of the Talmud engaged the question, of what sort of blessing is the blessing over Torah study? The blessing I'm referring to is La'asok b'divrei Torah. The words can be found in the Siddur. We say it at the beginning of every day in the early morning prayers. And it means to immerse ourselves, to busy ourselves with lives of Torah, with the study of Torah. And so the rabbis, the Tosafot, who are traditional commentators of the Talmud, when they're discussing the different types of blessings, they ask the question, well, every time I sit down to study Torah, do I need to make a new blessing? Meaning, I study Torah at 10 in the morning, and then I come to my evening class. Do I need to make a new blessing? The same way that if I had an apple in the morning and I have an apple in the evening, I need to make a different blessing. And I'm grateful to my teacher, Rabbi David Hoffman, for pointing me to this text, where the Tosafot say, no. You make one blessing in the morning, and it's poteret kol hayom. It covers the entire day. That one blessing at the very earliest moments of your day, when you say, thank you, God, for giving us the commandment of immersing ourselves in Torah, is good all day long. It doesn't expire until you say it the next day. I think there's a deep wisdom in that piece of halakha, in that piece of instruction as to how we're supposed to say that blessing. I think the wisdom is that Torah study goes beyond sitting down to study a text. It's not only about when we gather together in settings like this and we look at texts of our tradition. It's not only about when we take the Torah out of the ark and we put it on a table and we read from it out loud. It's certainly about that, but it's not only about it. To be immersed in a life of Torah, that happens all the time. It happens in every interaction we have. We immerse ourselves in Torah in the way in which we interact with our fellow human being, in the way we conduct ourselves in public, in the way we engage in our professions. All of those things are included in the mitzvah to be immersed in a life of Torah. What do I mean? I'll share two different stories that I think help to illustrate this. The first is a mundane, silly story. In rabbinical school, I had a friend who used to dress down for school. He used to wear t-shirts, Grateful Dead t-shirts were his favorite. And this young man met a woman and got married. And one day he was going out to school to study Torah, to be a seminary student. And he was wearing a sweater that had holes around the elbows. And his wife, he shared this story with me because he thought it was so funny, and it was actually a transformative moment for him. His wife said to him, as he was walking out the door, he says, is that the kind of clothes that a Ben Torah would wear? That a son of the Torah would wear? Is that befitting of a person who is trying to embody Torah values? And it was a revelatory moment for him. He started wearing ties to school. And he shared that story with me, and I'm grateful to him for showing me that the way the images we project, you don't necessarily have to wear a tie. I know in Los Angeles it's not fashionable to wear ties. But the kind of message we send to the world, and the way we conduct ourselves, and the way we appear, that has to do with the kind of values we want to project. I'll tell you one other story, which comes from a sheirut in Israel. Don't all the best stories happen in a taxi cab or a sheirut in Israel? So the sheirut is that taxi service where you get 10 different people together and it goes from the airport in Ben Gurion to Jerusalem. There's always the wildest characters there, and there's always some of the best stories. So there was a Haredi man on one of my sheiruts, dressed in black hat and full Haredi garb, and he was a bit aggressive, and he was telling the driver where he wanted to go. He says, take this route so that you drop me off first, and then you can drop everybody else off. Gee, that's fine. You know that guy, right? He was awesome. So the driver was upset. The driver said, I don't tell you how to do your job. Don't tell me how to do my job. And so there a little bit of a exchange happened between these two men. Eventually, he did drop the man off, and he turns to me. I'm always the last on this list. He turns to me and he says, by the way he's dressed, you'd think he'd be a nation. And there was a deep truth in what he was saying. He was a secular driver. He says, I'm not religious. He says, but that man claims to be religious because of the way he dresses. I know him to be a religious person. But he wasn't treating me with respect, and he was being chutzpahdik. The way he dresses, I expect that. And there's something in what that man was saying, what that driver taught me that night, was that to be a representative of these values is in some ways a burden, and in some ways a blessing. To be the embodiment of Torah, whether you wear a black hat or a kippah, or you outwardly claim to be Jewish, and people know you to be a Jew, when we conduct ourselves in public, in some ways we have a responsibility to be embodiments of Torah values, to be mensches, to be good people, to be polite. And I think those things are, as I said, at one and the same time, a heavy burden and a gift, a blessing. So I say that blessing every morning. Thank you, God, for commanding us, for making us holy, and giving us the opportunity to immerse our lives in Torah. And that blessing covers me throughout the day. And I try to be reminded of it, keep it at the forefront of my consciousness in whatever interactions I engage in the day. So thank you, and I give us all a blessing that we should continue to immerse ourselves in Torah in all of our
I now know what it would feel like to play basketball with Kobe Bryant, Pau Gasol, and Metta World Peace. So thank you very much for including me. I'm going to begin my Devar Torah with the beginning of a Devar Torah that I gave in the library minyan this past summer on Shabbat Nachamu, my Bar Mitzvah Parshat Bad Hanan. For those of you who were in the library minyan that day, perhaps this time you'll pay attention. The story is true that I was in Israel with Fran this past summer, and we were invited to a series of lectures at the Hebrew University. And when we came in, my nephew was in charge of this program, and he said the lectures are going to be in Hebrew, but someone's going to do a simultaneous translation into English, and there will be headphones for those who want to hear that simultaneous translation. Some of you remember the story. And my Hebrew is pretty good, but I thought, gee, an academic lecture, maybe I'll go with the headphones. So I had these headphones on. Unfortunately, though, the mic that the speaker was using to talk in Hebrew were so loud that I couldn't understand the English in my headphone, so I couldn't hear the Hebrew or the English. And at the same time, the person sitting next to me, who happened to be my brother, decided it would be good to give me a running commentary on the speech. So he kept leaning over to me and saying things like, "What an idiot! That's just stupid! How did she get to be a professor?" So anyway, but these three different things coming at me at the same time, I actually got very little out of it. But I thought about that experience on Parshat Bad Hanan when we read the Ten Commandments for the second time, and you know that the second time the Ten Commandments are in the Torah, the fourth commandment regarding Shabbat says, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho, guard or observe the Shabbat. But the first time, way back in Exodus and Parshat Yitro, it says, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho. So this is a major change in the two commandments. So regarding this change, Zachor first and then Shamor, remember and then observe, Rashi tells us, B'dibur echad ne'emru, u'b'shmiya echad nishma'u. They were actually spoken by God, as it were, at the exact same moment. The words Shamor and Zachor were spoken at the same moment, and the people understood at that moment exactly. They could hear the two different words spoken simultaneously, unlike my unhappy experience at the lecture. And you probably know this phrase from the beautiful melody we sing on Friday night, L'chad Yodi, that the poets took this line from Rashi, Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, hishmianu el hamyuchad. The words of Zachor, remember Shabbat, Shamor, observe Shabbat, were spoken at the same time, and the people understood it at the same time. So in the library minyan that day, I spoke about two aspects of Shabbat, one represented by Zachor, remembering the Shabbat, and another of observing Shabbat. And that's the end of what I said before, because I want to take this in a different direction in thinking about the Torah as a whole. And it now seems to me that the entire Torah and the entire religion of Judaism is about Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad, remembering and observing that God said these two things at once, and these two are the same aspects, or two sides of the same coin. And let me explain what I mean. Zachor is part of the Torah, remembering. And when I say remembering, I'm talking about the historical parts of the Torah. The parts of the Torah that tell us a story, how the world was created, the story of Noah and the ark, the story of Abraham Avinu leaving his parents' home and going out into the world, and the story that's about to begin this current Shabbat, coming up in 2 days, my personal favorite story of the entire Torah, the story of Yosef, and his ups and his downs, very, very high up, by being singled out by his father among all the brothers to get a coat of many colors, and how the brothers take revenge when he has all these dreams. It's an amazing story. His brothers sell him into slavery. He ends up then explaining the dreams to two other fellow prisoners, and he gets out. He has all sorts of adventures and becomes ultimately the second most powerful man in Egypt, then reveals himself to his brothers. It's amazing, and it goes over the next several weeks. But it wouldn't be in the Torah if it was just a wonderful story. There are many, many wonderful stories throughout literature. But there's something about this Zachor that is combined with the Shamor. There is something about this history of our people that is combined with teaching us how one should live a righteous life. And when we see what Yosef does when the wife of Potiphar, his master, tries to seduce him, and he runs away from her and yet ends up in prison anyway, we see what it's like to be a mensch, what it's like to avoid temptation. And through the Zachor comes the Shamor. We are learning how to live from reading the story of Yosef. And of course, later on, after he reveals himself to his brothers, they think he's going to kill them. After all, he's now a very, very powerful person. And why would he forgive them for what they had done to him? And then he forgives them and says, don't worry, God had planned this all out. It's not you. It was God who sent me here. So Yosef teaches us something, and the story teaches us something about how to live. And I would say that the Shamor part of the Torah, all of the mitzvot that are in the Torah, they can't be observed fully without having a Zachor in connection with that. And what do I mean by that? The Torah says, don't eat pig, don't eat shellfish, put on tefillin. All of the mitzvot that are in the Torah. But it isn't just like picking up the California Penal Code or the California Code of Civil Procedure, just laws in and of themselves, because the laws have a history. And because I know that when I'm observing a law, my grandfather and his grandfather and his grandfather and his grandfather observed these same laws. And in some of the laws we are even told, why should you observe this law? Because you were strangers in a strange land, because I brought you out of the land of Egypt. So the observance part, the Shamor part, is always connected, or should be connected, if we're doing it right, to the Zachor part, so that we, as we observe mitzvot, are connecting ourselves with our people. My favorite passage in the Torah that I think really illustrates Zachor and Shamor is when Yaakov is dying, and he calls his son Yosef, and he says, Yosef, I want you to swear that you're going to do me this favor. I don't want to be buried in Egypt. I want you to bury me in Israel. Take me with you when you leave and go back to Israel. And what he says to Yosef is, Aseh imadi chesed ve'emet. I want you to do chesed. What's chesed? Kindness. Ve'emet. And what's emet? Truth. So I want you to do chesed ve'emet. And what is chesed ve'emet? Well, Rashi says, chesed shel emet, what is ultimately the truest form of kindness, is kindness that you do for someone who is dead. And the tremendous care and love that we show to someone who has died, the tremendous reverence we have for the body, the fact that we sit Shiva and then say Kaddish for someone for such a long time, that reverence for the dead. And Rashi explains to us, why is this chesed shel emet, the ultimate truth of kindness? Because any other time you're doing something for someone, maybe somewhere in the back of your mind you're thinking, well, I'll do this for him today, and then maybe I'll need a favor back. So if someone comes and says, Joel, I'm a little short this week, can you lend me some money? And I say, sure, I can lend you some money. And maybe I'm thinking, boy, if I'm ever down and out, I'll go back to this guy, and he'll have to lend me money, because after all, one hand washes the other. But when someone has died, he or she can never possibly repay you. So the truest form of kindness is for someone who has died. And when we go through the Shiva period and the Shloshim period, when we're in a house of mourning and we're paying respect to someone who has died, that's what this story is about. So all of the laws that Judaism has that are so important and so meaningful to observe regarding death can be connected to this promise in this beautiful story in which Yaakov asks Yosef to please bury him in Israel and not in Egypt. So for me, the ultimate part of Torah is that Shamor v'Zachor, the Dibur Echad, it's really inseparable to remember the historical connection with our people, and at the same time, while we're observing a commandment, we're thinking of our people, and while we're thinking of our people, we're observing a commandment. And I just want to close with this prayer. Zachor, remember, may everyone in this room remember how you felt when you either saw directly or heard that the Sefer Torah had fallen in the library minyan on Rosh Hashanah. That stab of pain, almost shock. I was upstairs. I wasn't in the minyan that day, but I heard about it, of course, and I just felt this terrible, terrible shock. Let's remember that shock. But even more so, let's remember what this Kahal did to atone for that, to make amends for it, to actually turn it, as Rabbi Kligfeld did, into a tremendous learning opportunity for all of us. So let's always remember that. And then the second piece is shamor, to guard. Let's guard every sacred Torah in this shul even more carefully, so that as wonderful as this night is, may it never happen again. Thank
Eshkoach, Joel, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Lucas. You're opening up basketball. I now know what it's like to play golf with Rabbi Yosef Kaneski, Rabbi Ari Lucas, and Joel Grossman. I'm a terrible golfer. While I'm giving my introduction, please take and pass these out to on the table. There have been some obviously meaningful parts in the reactions to what happened at Rosh Hashanah. One page, double-sided. Okay, everybody have? Okay. So, there have been the obvious and more easily identifiable reactions to what happened in terms of people feeling the impact of the fast. And you're going to see that if you look at the booklet or if you look at some of the things on the wall. There's a learning that we are doing tonight. But there are some less obvious things that emerged in this that I couldn't have predicted. Someone sent me an email at some point during this and said, you know, I never thought of Peticha, ark opening, as such a great honor to get in a Shabbos moment. Right? Hagba, lovely, lifting the Torah, reading from the Torah, taking Aliyah. Peticha used to feel, this person said, like sort of a throwaway. Yeah, because you can do nothing else, you can open the ark at Shabbat. Right? You know, when you in the wedding circuit, if you're asked to read the ketubah at a wedding, it's like, thanks a lot, right? You know, you clearly don't have a nice enough voice with the Sheva Brachot, you don't feel enough about me to get to speak, but I can break my teeth on old Aramaic, thanks for nothing. I think that's how some people felt about Peticha. And someone said to me, I now realize that Peticha is a very important moment. Opening the ark to expose the Torah to the congregation to the Torah, and being there at the end, how is that any less significant than holding it, wrapping it, or saying the blessing over it? Clearly, that's a moment of significance. Someone else said to me that they used to consider, and you see this, right? That the time that the Torah is going around the room as a great time to catch up with the person behind you in shul, right? And by the way, sociologically, we see that happen. It's one of the reasons why I'm not thrilled with the idea of lots of people walking around the room with the Torah, because I think that moment should be about the Torah, not about saying necessarily multiple Shabbat Shaloms to one another. Not that I'm against saying Shabbat Shalom. Someone wrote me at some point saying, I now realize that the time that the Torah is being paraded around the shul is not only an exciting time, it's a vulnerable time. Because if the Torah is out and being held, it means that it is less safe than it is enclosed in its womb in the ark. So one of the things that resulted from this process that we couldn't have predicted is that moments that we might have considered to be smaller or mundane or less significant have been upgraded in the eyes of members of the community. That's not a bad thing. Another thing which emerged is that we have lots of rooms in this building, and lots of rooms on a Shabbat morning holiday where Sifrei Torah come out. And for the most part, where you are at any given time is a reality. And that's not also a bad thing. I think it's wonderful to feel a connection to where you normally die. Right? That's a lovely thing. But the reaction that people had in response to what happened seemed to ramify way beyond minyan boundaries and borders. People felt that a Torah fell in their community. It didn't matter whether they were in the room at the time or not, whether that was the place they normally davened or not, or even as the news spread beyond our community, whether they were part of Temple Beth Am or not, they were injured somehow. They were injured by the accidental, but still very real, falling of the Torah to the ground. If that raises in people's consciousnesses the idea that we're more connected to one another rather than less connected to one another, both inside the synagogue and beyond, it's not a terrible thing. Although, again, we wouldn't have scripted it that way. So, what I want to share with you in a few texts that we're going to do quicker than they deserve to be, is some of the texts that, for me, exemplify most significantly what studying Torah and living Torah ought to be about, now that we've had an experience of several months really linking the high holidays to Hanukkah about the placement of Torah in our communal lives. 3 sources. Again, I'm going to go through it quicker than they deserve. So the first one is from the Talmud, Masechet Yoma. It's the tractate of Talmud dealing mostly with Yom Kippur, although if you've studied Talmud before, you know that the Talmud jumps around from topic to topic. Maaseh b'shnei kohanim. Story happened that 2 priests, Shayu Shneihen Shavim, they were neck and neck. V'ratzim v'olin b'kevesh. They were running to a place in the Mikdash, in the temple, where the sacrifices were done, sort of a little place outside of the altar. Kadam echad mehen. One of them got ahead. B'toch arba amot shel chavero. Within 4 cubits of the place that they were arriving. Sorry. Natal sakin. The other one took a knife. V'taka lo b'libo. Struck him in the heart. The image for the rabbis is that the sacred place became a chariot race. That's the subtext here. The place that was supposed to be about offering a sacrifice to God became a marathon. And 2 of the Kohanim who were supposed to exemplify the highest of what the community stands for were racing to one another. Have you ever been anywhere in a synagogue where someone knocked someone else over to touch the Torah first as it came around? The rabbis are dealing with, I think, in an apocryphal story, I hope it's apocryphal, the most extreme version of that. They were racing to see who could get to the altar first. The one who was behind, instead of tripping him, pulls out a knife and stabs him in his heart. It gets worse. Amad Rabbi Tzadok al malot ha'ulam. Rabbi Tzadok stood up on the steps leading into the room. V'amar, Achenu Beit Israel Shimu, brothers of Israel, listen up. Harehu Omer, it says in, quote, that verse from Parshat Ki Teitzei that deals with a corpse that is found halfway between 2 different towns and no one knows how it happened. That a corpse is found in that situation. What should happen is the elders of the community should come out and do this ritual that helps figure out how the community can do penance for this corpse that's unidentified. Anu al mila havi egla arufa. For us, whom should we offer the sacrifice of that heifer, that veal calf that would have been sacrificed in that situation? Al ha'ir o al ha'azarot. Whose jurisdiction is this murder? Is it the jurisdiction of the city of Jerusalem or the jurisdiction of the courtyards of the temple? what do you think is the force of this part of the story, where a rabbi is standing over this moment and asking this question? Whose jurisdiction did this murder take place in? What's the force of it? What's the tone of voice, do you think, in the story? What's that?
Seems like callous.
Totally callous. Like the Talmud is giving us, almost with incredulity, that this incredible event happened in our holy place, and the first thing the rabbi wants to do is, well, should we rule this way or should we rule that way? Whose jurisdiction is it? Who takes responsibility? What's the halacha? What's the answer? As opposed to, how in God's name do we allow Torah and Judaism and the sanctuary to be infected by racing and competition? And I'm firmer than you, and I'm faster than you, and I deserve to get to the Torah first. Ga'u kol ha'am b'tchiyah. The entire people gathered, broke out in crying. Ba'aviv shel tinok. The father of, and look at the language, what does tinok mean? Baby. He wasn't a baby, but the Talmud puts that language in. The father of this babe, this young Jew, came. Umatza'o shehum b'farper. Found him with his heart still butterflying. Farper is the same word as a parpar. The heart was still fluttering. He was still alive, but the rabbi was trying to figure out, where we should place him on the map so we know where to sacrifice that calf. Amar, harei hu kaparachem. May my son's life, be your atonement for what you have let happen in this sacred place. Va'adayin b'ni mefarper. My son's heart is still beating. V'lo nitma'as sakin. Sarcastically. Unless you wonder whether or not the knife has become tameh, because something that has been come into contact with a corpse becomes impure, guess what? He's not dead yet, so the knife is still pure. In case you were going to ask that question as well. Lilamedcha, this entire narrative comes to teach you, shekasher lehem taharot kelim. It was more significant for them to figure out whether or not the knife was kosher. Yoter mishfichut damim. It was more significant to them than bloodshed, and not just bloodshed, but bloodshed in this very spot. This text, by the way, is fascinating that it appears in the Talmud. You would think that if you were editing a text, it was supposed to highlight, right, Jewish life and Jewish ritual and Jewish leaders and rabbis and priests, you wouldn't include such an indictment. The rabbis are famously open to, eager to put in their holiest texts corrective sources, reflecting on how, if unchecked and unbalanced by good values, even their and our own sacred texts can be lived out in a way which is the exact opposite of how they were intended. This story is one of the more painful texts in the Talmud about what can happen in religious life the closer you get to the sacred. The closer you get to the sacred, the more likely this chariot race was going to happen. Right? Who was teaching those boys in the yeshiva, as it were, beforehand, that suggested that when you get close to the altar, you should run and try to get there first? It's an indictment, actually, of the system. What are we teaching our children in terms of what their experience ought to be in religious life? Do we overdo competition? Do we put too much in the stake of honors that are given or extended? We haven't had bloodshed, but is it possible that even in modern Judaism we have let our sacred areas be infected by some of what the outside world contributes, not in a positive way? Second text takes that to another level. This is from Megillah, page 6a. This one is a harder text technically. Don't hesitate to ask me if you have a question, because you have to understand it to get it, but it's not easy to understand. The one thing I want you to understand before we read this text is that one of the things the rabbis did all the time was to derive, to connect names of places that they didn't really understand in biblical sources, and connect them to names that they did recognize through kind of word games, which we all know were really them winking at us. I don't think they actually believed direct with the associations they were making, but these word games were very, very resonant for them. Amar Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Abahu said, quoting from that well-known and well-loved prophet Zephaniah, thanks, Joel, the Ikron Te'akar. Zephaniah, the prophet, one of the Tresar, one of the 12 minor prophets, said, the town of Ekron will be uprooted. Notice in Hebrew the play, because the root of Ekron is Ayin Kuf Resh, and the root of the word uprooted is Ayin Kuf Resh. So Zephaniah said that whatever Ekron is, may it be akard, and may it be uprooted. You might actually know that root. I always like connecting things you may know from Naomi Shemer's song Al Kol Eila. The second verse of the stanza is Al Nata Kor Natua. Do not uproot that which has been planted, which some people thought was a response to 1967 saying do not uproot the settlement, but that's not either here nor there. That's what the root means. So Rabbi Abahu said, this Ekron, we don't have a place called Ekron living in Rabbinic Judaism. We never heard of it. But I'm going to say Zo Kesari. Ekron is Caesarea. Raise your hand if you've been to Caesarea. A lot of you. What's your association with Caesarea, Avi?
Ruins.
Ruins. Okay, what kind of ruins? Roman ruins, right? In one sentence, what's the history of Caesarea in the ancient world? It was a resort. It's one of the places where Herod, right, in his edifice conflicts. Edifice conflicts. Created this amphitheater, this extraordinary place where Roman culture could have a foothold in the Judea of his great imagination. So Rabbi Abahu, living a couple of centuries later, right? So he's living in like the 2nd or 3rd century CE. Says the Ekron that the prophet Zephaniah was talking about that needed to be uprooted was Caesarea bat Edom, who was the daughter, the outgrowth of the Edomites. The Edomites are associated in rabbinic thinking with Rome. Shehi Yoshevet ben Hacholot. It's this town that is sitting amongst the seas, amongst the sands. And if you've been to Caesarea, you know what it means. Vehi Yaita Yated Tikuah Yisrael b'mei Avanim. It was a peg, it was a thorn, stuck in the side of Israel since the Greek times. Meaning what? Caesarea was built up in what they, the Jews, consider to be sacred land, as a great amphitheater, the Mall of America, stuck right in the center of sacred area. It was the representation of everything the rabbis were trying to push against. Right? The gladiator and the amphitheater and whatever you call with the horses, the hippodromes, right? It was a wonder, it was the Grove, right? Or the worst version of it, it was Las Vegas. It was Stone, it was Sodom and Gomorrah, right in the middle of what the Jews were trying to create as sacred.
Why was the ground sacred? Just because it was Israel?
It's part of the Nachalah, part of the inheritance of Eretz Yisrael.
So it was just because it's not special.
Ekron is one of the 5 great cities of Philistia. And I'm amazed that this would not have been known to
Even if it was known, it wouldn't have stopped the rabbis from making this work here. Right? They're going to convince us that conceptually, because Ekron is built from the root akar, meaning to root up, they're going to say Ekron is a place that deserves to be rooted up.
And the other confusing thing to me here is that it was not built by the Greeks at all. And the history here seems to be confused.
They're doing more value teaching than raw history.
Okay, thanks.
When the Chashmonaim, the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees got up, v'nitzchu, and defeated them, hayu korinata achidat migdal shir. I don't want to spend too much time on this line. The Maccabees basically rededicated it. That's what they were doing. They were rededicating both temples and other places, and it became a sort of like a tower of music. It became, for a short period of time during the Maccabean dynasty, a place where good things were happening. We have a verse from another prophet, Zechariah. Now that I, Rabbi Abahu, have convinced you, if I have, that Ekron is Caesarea, then you can understand the following sentence. May it be, Aluf Yehuda, may Caesarea be like a general, a chief in Judah, Judah as a representation of Jerusalem and the Jewish people and all the things that are wonderful. V'ikaron kibusi. May ikron be like Yebusi. Yebusi is a code word for Jerusalem because the Jebusites were the people that sort of had access to that land before King David essentially established it as the capital. Elu teatriot v'kirkasiyot shebe'adom shatidin sarei Yehuda ulamei behem Torah v'rabim. The rabbis writing in a time when they did not have control over the likes of Caesarea, when Caesarea continued to be a place of Roman, in their minds, a licentiousness and too much exposure to the culture around them, too many races and things going on. They said, when it says that Ikron will be like Yebusi, it means that Caesarea one day will be like Jerusalem. Caesarea will be one day like Jerusalem. And all those theaters, and all those circus-like things that take place amongst the Edomites, the Romans, one day the princes of Judah will teach Torah in them. My favorite place to teach this text is in Caesarea, because it actually shows that Rabbi Abahu's preposterous prophecy came true on some level. That the Roman Caesarea is a ruin, and we can go there and teach Torah within. That while modern Israel is not by any means the perfect image of what the rabbis imagined society would be, the Jews have indeed come back and been able to place Torah and Jewish life in places that beforehand had been dedicated to the antithesis of what Jewish ideas were all about. If we put these two stories together, two texts together, where it leaves us is that Judaism and Torah has something specific and important to contribute to the world. And in its absence, there is a vacuum for which the world suffered. The rabbis had a much easier time saying that than we moderns would. Right? We moderns would not necessarily sort of look out around the non-Jewish parts of the world and say, it's a place where evil festers. We might say that we are, as Jews who are taking Judaism seriously, somewhat iconoclastic, and saying that there are things that we think that our Torah, our tradition, has to contribute to our existence, our reality, our lives, that if we didn't have it, we'd be poorer for it. If we didn't have Torah in our lives, then our lives would be much more like Caesarea than Jerusalem. And even with Torah in our lives, if we don't handle it carefully, even Jerusalem can become Caesarea. That's the first text. Even Jerusalem can become Caesarea if you're not wielding Torah properly, protecting it enough, and also applying it in a way that deserves its own title. Turn the page over. Our friend Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Abahu, this is in Kohelet Rabbah, this is not in the Talmud, this is the Midrash on the book of Ecclesiastes. Rabbi Abahu Azal Kesarim. Rabbi Abahu, that same one who was drashing in the previous page about Caesarea eventually becoming a place of Torah, he went up to Caesarea. Va'ata min taman va'apwe nihirim. He came back and like Moses coming down from the mountain, his face shone. Chamune Talmidaya Salkin va'amrin Rabbi Yochanan Hadein Rabbi Abahu Ishkach Sima. His students saw him with his face lit up and said to Rabbi Yochanan, this Rabbi Abahu, he must have just seen some amazing treasure. He must have been exposed to some amazing source of light because his face is shining. His face is glowing. He's Moses-like. Amarlun Lama. Why do you say that he found a treasure? Amrin le de anpue nihirim. They said because his face is all lit up. He must have seen something extraordinary for his face to be lit up. Amarlun, he said to them, Dilma oraita charata shama. Maybe he heard a great chiddush. Maybe he heard someone give a great new interpretation of a piece of Torah, because that would be enough to light up your face. Salkun legabe. So they went to him, Rabbi Abahu. Amrule, and they said to him, Uma oraita charata shamamar. What new piece of Torah, what new interpretation of the Torah did you hear that lit up your face? Because that must be why you are looking so exalted. Amarlun tosefta atika amrun. He said, I actually didn't really learn any new interpretation of the Torah when I was in Caesarea. I learned an old Tosefta, an old rabbinic text, an old source that was trying to make sense of a Torah passage. I learned it. Kara alav, therefore it is said about him, Chachmat Adam Ta'ir Panav. The wisdom of a human can enlighten the face. What do you think this source is saying?
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. Tell me why it's beautiful. What's the main message? If you were using this source as the main point of your sermon, what would the sermon be about?
Torah Chaim. It's like getting a blood transfusion. Learning Torah. And
The initial assumption was the only way he could have had his face shine like Moses is if he had had a revelatory moment with God. That's why Rabbi Yochanan said he probably learned a new Chiddush on the Torah. But the answer is he hadn't learned a new Chiddush in the Torah. He learned a Tosefta. He learned a rabbinic text. He learned a human filtering, interpretation, a human distillation of holy text, and that too was enough. It's as if to say, Moses is coming down from the mountain with his face all lit up is not only for revelation at Sinai. We can have our faces and our souls similarly lit up when we are exposed to human wisdom that emerges from this holy text. It's only in partnership that the holiness of our text which fell and which we honor, it's only in partnership with our minds, our activity, linking up with what Joel said, our application, which pulls up what Rabbi Kanevsky said, and we did not plan this in advance, that the sanctity really is present. Someone aptly critiqued me and us after we sent out this original email saying, Rabbi, have you not just contributed to idolatry? Have you not made the claim even louder that the Torah is something to be worshipped in and of itself? It's just parchment. It's just wood. It fell. Give it a kiss and move on. It's an apt critique. And my response back was that you're right that on some level, quote unquote, all that thing is sitting over there is wood and parchment and ink. But what it represents in a community such as ours, especially when we live it out, not the way they did in Caesarea, and not the way they did in that first story where it became a Torah of competition and a Torah of fights and a Torah of racing. And when we apply to it the kinds of wisdoms that Rabbi Abba learned in Caesarea, then it's not only an inert object, it's alive as a human being is alive and alive in our lives and alive in our souls. I, as a rabbi, spend my life trying to convince as many people as possible that what emerges from the Torah can light up our lives and light up the world. But it can't do it passively. If what comes out of this experience is that you kiss the Torah more lovingly when it goes around the room, that's nice, but it's 20% of this experience. If what comes out of this experience is that you feel more invited to engage with the ideas and the principles and the values that emanate from that text over there, filtered through the wisdom of the rabbinic tradition and are given to us as an inheritance to live by and live through, then the disaster of the Torah having fallen will have been converted into the Torah and us having been uplifted. And that's certainly my goal for all of us. And I honor you for your having participated in this process and sharing it with the rest of the community.
I was just, but just adding to what you said, just like Rabbi Abahu was surprised that Caesarea brought this to him. I think there was an element of surprise in finding it there. I think we could add to that, the surprise in finding such meaning through you and our community also input into this process.
Thank you. I know that some of us are intending to go upstairs to hear and listen to Rabbi Mordechai Rosenstein give his presentation on art. I do think that we should do a hakafa. And we have the Torah here, it's been fixed, and let's move this.
Make a circle!
Shalom.